I finished the digging just in time for my aunt's return with fish and chips for dinner wrapped in newspaper. After dinner, it was time for the visit to the Rumbles, who lived next door but one. "Are your hands clean?" asked my aunt sharply. "Yes, aunt. I washed them before dinner." "Well, go and wash them again. You're such a messy child. And wash your face and comb your hair while you're about it." I went into the bathroom, turned on the tap for a moment, then turned it off again. I combed my hair, inspected my face critically in the mirror, and called out, "I'm ready now." My aunt examined me with care. Not much better. Still, I suppose you'll do." Arrived at the Rumbles, my aunt rang the bell. The door was opened by a short, plump, rosy-cheeked lady. She greeted my aunt, then smiling down at me, she put an arm around my shoulders to lead me inside. I liked the safe feeling that arm gave me. Her house had exactly the same layout as that of my aunt, but not the same smell. It smelled nice, a bit like a baker's shop, a bit like the toffee apple stand at the fair. By contrast, the smell of my aunt's house reminded me of the shoe cupboard at the convent, where once a month I had to help a novice clean the nuns' shoes. "So, you're the nephew," said Mrs. Rumble. "I've been hearing a lot about you." "I hope what you heard was good, Mrs. Rumble." She gave a chuckle. "Not all of it," she joked. Then she became more solemn. "It's terrible what you've been through down there in London with the air raids and all. It's good you're up here, safe away from all that." She turned to my aunt. "I'll go and put the kettle on for some tea. Does he drink tea?" I disliked the idea of my aunt replying for me, so I said quickly, "I'd rather have water, if it's all the same to you, Mrs. Rumble." My aunt frowned at me behind Mrs. Rumble's turned back, but the latter called out cheerfully, "Of course, dear, if you prefer it. Or wouldn't you rather have ginger beer? I make it myself." My aunt scowled even more severely, shaking her head at me. "Don't put yourself to any trouble, Mrs. Rumble. He'll drink what he's given and be thankful." "Oh, it's no trouble, I assure you. I was going to open a bottle for the boys anyway," responded Mrs. Rumble. She turned to me. "I'm sure you'd like a ginger beer, wouldn't you now?" I nodded enthusiastically. She took a tray, put 3 glasses on it, opened a large stone bottle with a satisfying pop, and put it beside the glasses. "You probably won't want to sit here listening to women's talk. I'll call the boys, and you can drink together outside. Come with me." She went to the back door, opened it, paused, and went again into the kitchen to return with a second bottle, which she plonked down by the first. "It's thirsty weather. You'll surely be needing a second one." I decided that I liked Mrs. Rumble very much. She went out on the back step with the tray. I followed her. "Roy," she called. "Roy! He's here! Come and meet him!" 2 boys appeared. They were a little older than me. One, tow-headed and muscular, but otherwise resembling his mother, was obviously Roy. He grinned at me. "Hi," he said. The other, long, lean and lanky, looked less friendly. "I'm Brian," he said. "Brian Lark." Roy took the tray from his mother. "Come on, let's drink it in the shed. I've got something to show you." I followed him round the corner of the house to a large shed. Brian came behind, dragging his feet. The shed was well equipped with tools, including a lathe, the first I'd ever seen, except in pictures. On a long workbench, which took up a whole wall, was a splendid cart made of planks and wooden boxes. It was complete except for the 2 front wheels. These, attached to an axle, were lying alongside on the bench. Roy put the tray down next to them. "You came just a little bit too soon," said Roy to me. "Another 5 minutes, and we'd have got the front axle on, and then she'll be finished, except for the painting. Let's get the axle fixed right away, and then we can christen her with the ginger beer." "She's a beauty," I exclaimed, and I meant it. At the orphanage we weren't allowed to have carts. What are you going to call her?" "That's for you to decide," replied Roy surprisingly. "Me?" I queried, looking up at them both and wondering why this honour should fall on me. Brian had a sour expression. He hadn't yet spoken since introducing himself. "Have you got a cart?" I asked him brightly, wanting to cheer him up. He nodded. "What do you call it?" "Larkspur," he replied, looking even more sour. "That's a flower," I said straightforwardly, not meaning any kind of disparagement, but he took it badly. "No need to make fun of it. A spur is what you apply to a horse to make it go faster, and Lark is my name, so Larkspur is what makes me go faster." "It's a very good name," I replied soothingly. I then attempted a compliment. "And with your long legs, I bet you can go pretty fast already." This went down even worse. Brian was sensitive about his lanky appearance. "My mum says you shouldn't make personal remarks. It's bad manners." "Sorry, I meant it as a compliment." "Well, you can keep your compliments." I turned back to Roy, who had been busy fixing the axle to the main body of the cart. "I don't know what I'd call it. It looks fast, so I'd give it a name connected with the idea of speed. Lightning, perhaps." "Then Lightning it'll be," declared Roy. "She'll be even faster when we can find some better wheels for the front. Ball-bearing pram wheels would be the best, but they're hard to come by. These are plain-bearing and a bit small. They set her down too far at the front, but I can't find anything better. They'll just have to do for the moment." Roy took up the glasses with the ginger beer. He handed one to Brian, one to me, and kept the third for himself. He turned to face the cart and raised his glass. We did the same. "In the name of Mercury, speedy messenger of light, I dub thee Lightning. May God bless all who ride in her." Roy poured a little of his ginger beer on the front of the cart. We did the same. "To Lightning," he proposed. "To Lightning," we repeated, and drained our glasses. Roy and I lifted Lightning down off the bench onto the floor. We rolled her outside. She ran easily. "Right," said Roy. "Hop in and try her out down the side of the house." I was flattered by being given this precedence, but protested all the same. "She's not my cart," I objected. "You should go first." "What do you mean, not your cart? Of course Lightning is yours. You named her, didn't you? We built her for you. You can't be a member of the Lyons Avenue lot and not have a cart." And so I became a member, but Brian didn't look too pleased about it. After I had made a couple of runs with Lightning, my aunt came out from taking tea with Mrs. Rumble. "I'm going up the street now to do the shopping. Behave yourself while I'm gone, and be sure you're in by 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock? I groaned, dismayed. "I thought we had supper at 7. "Saturday night is bath night," declared my aunt firmly. "I want you home in time to take your bath. 6 o'clock sharp, mind, not a minute later." "All right, aunt. Look what Roy's given me," I exclaimed with pride, pointing at Lightning. "Oh, that's nice. It'll be useful for when you do the shopping." Although I didn't say anything, I didn't like the sound of that remark, particularly if it meant that I had to go up to the street to shop. "I don't know where you're going to keep it, though. Perhaps Mrs. Rumble has some space." I liked Mrs. Rumble, so I didn't want her to be imposed upon for the storage of my cart. Besides which, I wanted Lightning close at hand, so that I could get her out whenever I wanted without having to trouble anyone else. "I can keep it under the shed. It's high enough off the ground, and it'll be dry under there." My aunt looked doubtful, but she agreed. "I suppose it'll have to do," she said grudgingly, and off she went to fetch her bicycle. I turned to Brian, who was still looking sour. I was beginning to think it was his natural expression. "Come on, Brian, you have a go now. I'll push you down the slope at the side of the house." I pulled Lightning up the slope. Brian followed me. Roy stayed by the back steps. I turned the cart around. "OK, get in," I said to Brian. "Who do you think you're ordering around?" snapped Brian hotly. I was taken aback. "I didn't think I was ordering anybody around," I replied, somewhat perplexed by his attitude. "Well, see that you don't. I don't want to ride in your stupid cart anyway." And he gave Lightning a kick that set her sideways across the path. "Look out what you're doing," I exclaimed, fearful for my new possession. I pushed him lightly out of the way so that I could put Lightning straight again and check for possible damage. "Here, who do you think you're shoving?" he yelled, pushing me back hard and giving Lightning another kick that turned her over on her side. I didn't expect this, and I felt my temper rising. "Do that again and I'll hit you," I warned, moving forward to put my cart upright. As I approached him, Brian deliberately gave Lightning another kick and pushed me hard. I staggered backwards, tripped over the cart, and fell painfully across it. Now I was really angry. I got slowly up and walked towards him, my fists clenched. "I warned you not to do that again," I said between gritted teeth. He began to look a little scared now, but wasn't prepared to back down. "So what are you going to do about it?" "This," I replied, and jabbed him smartly on the nose. Father O'Hearn, who taught us to box at the orphanage, would have been proud to see that jab. Brian gave a yell and staggered back, his hands over his face. Blood started to ooze between his fingers. "I'm going to tell my mother about you," he threatened, and went off along Lyons Avenue. I went slowly back down the path and round the corner of the house. Roy was sitting on the back step. "What's wrong?" he asked as he saw my face. "Where's Brian? Why hasn't he come down with Lightning? Won't it go?" He had obviously seen and heard nothing of our quarrel. I tried half-heartedly to make a joke of it. "He struck Lightning, and then Lightning struck him," I said, and gave a sickly smile. "Where's Brian, then?" asked Roy, looking concerned. He didn't understand my feeble play on words. "He's gone home with a bloody nose. I hit him." "You hit him?" queried Roy, although it was more an exclamation than a question. He gave a queer sort of half-smile. "Why did you hit him?" "I did warn him. I said that if he pushed me again I would hit him. He did, and so I did. Not only that, he kicked Lightning and turned her over. She's still on her side up the path." Roy sighed. "He's had it coming for a long time. I guess it's because he's always kept under at home. His frustration has to come out somewhere. He's perhaps a bit jealous, too. I'm just sorry it was you." "So am I agreed wholeheartedly. I was in even greater agreement when I saw a tall, bony, masterful woman entering the gate with Brian in tow. I felt like fleeing, but summoned up my courage and stood my ground. She strode straight up to me, towering over me like a church steeple. She turned to her son. "Is this the one who did it?" Brian nodded. A cloth held over his nose prevented him speaking. She lifted a hand as though to strike me. I cowered, preparing to receive a blow, but at the last moment she decided against immediate violence in favour of a verbal attack. "You little demon!" she shrieked. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself! What do you mean by attacking my poor Brian?" "I didn't attack him. He attacked me." "You horrible little liar! My peaceful Brian wouldn't attack anybody." "I'm not a liar," I said, and kept my eyes fixed on hers for fear of a blow from her direction. But out of the corner of one eye I saw the back door opening and Mrs. Rumble coming out. "Oh, Mrs. Lark!" she cried, all aflutter. "I'm so sorry this should have happened." "So am I," responded Mrs. Clark. "I should have thought your son would have kept better company." This widely insulting remark, which could be taken as a slur on Mrs. Rumble herself, was really rich coming from Mrs. Lark, considering that it was her son who had started it. Mrs. Rumble let the implied slur pass. She took the wind out of Mrs. Lark's sails, however, by saying gently, "Mrs. Lark, I'm very sorry to have to say that Brian's assailant is correct when he says he's not a liar. I was at the kitchen window, and I saw and heard everything." "What do you mean?" demanded Mrs. Lark suspiciously. "I don't see him with a bleeding nose. There's not a mark on him." "That may be so," said Mrs. Rumble equably. "Nevertheless, this affair was not of his making. He surely didn't start it, and he gave Brian fair warning that he would hit him if he didn't stop pushing him around and damaging his property. I'm sorry to be telling you this, Mrs. Lark, but Brian actually pushed him so hard that he fell to the ground. It was only then that he got up and punched your son." Mrs. Lark swung away from me towards Brian. He quailed and put his hands up to protect his head. "Just wait till I get you home, you young hooligan," she yelled. "I'll teach you to pick on boys smaller than yourself." I started to feel sorry for Brian. Certainly he'd been very provoking, but he'd got a bloody nose as a result. I felt that we were now quits. It would be unjust if his mother were to punish him further. I decided to go to his help. "Mrs. Lark," I cried, placing myself alongside Brian, "I'm sorry I made Brian's nose bleed. I didn't intend that, only to stop him pushing me around. It hurt when he pushed me over, and that made me angry, but that wasn't his fault. I had an accident a couple of days ago, and my ribs are still sore. Can't we just apologize and then forget this ever happened? I'd like Brian to be my friend." I knew there was a measure of hypocrisy in this little speech, but I'd learned quite a long time ago that a few honeyed words help considerably to make life sweeter. I smiled up at Mrs. Lark, then held out my hand towards Brian. "Quits, Brian?" I proposed in a conciliatory tone. "I'm sorry I made your nose bleed." Brian took the cloth from his nose and inspected it. There was no fresh blood. "It's stopped bleeding now," he said in a relieved voice. He put out his hand towards me. "Okay, it's quits," he said, taking my hand. "I'm sorry I pushed you over. I didn't really mean to push you so hard." "It's all right. You couldn't have known about my bruised ribs." "Oh, Mrs. Lark," said Mrs. Rumble, "I'm glad you came around. I'll put the kettle on and make us a nice cuppa." Roy's mother also knew how to use justly a little honeyed hypocrisy. As the two ladies disappeared into the house, Roy said to Brian, "Why don't you get your cart, and we'll go up the layers to the mountain glide?" "Okay," responded Brian. "Back in a jiffy."